There is nothing quite like space horror in the horror genre. I'm a big fan of the horror genre and have been ever since I was young because my favorite movie ever made is 1979's Alien, a space horror masterpiece and one of the first that really tried to approach what is it like to be hunted in a metal box in the middle of nothing. There's a sort of claustrophobia that exists when you're on a space station and when you are in a box you can't escape than if you're, say, in a house or in the ocean being hunted by a shark. There's a different kind of fear being hit there. You know, shark based or alligator, crocodile, water based horror has thalassophobia as a big thing that they hit what's underneath the water I can't see. And then things like Halloween have home invasion fear. But it's a little bit different when it's claustrophobic, when you have no potential escape. In the water example, maybe not within the horror films themselves or stuff, but you can just leave the water. Thalassophobia is avoidable, right? In the home example, you can leave your home. That is not going to deal with the fear of when you come back, constantly thinking somebody could be there, but you can leave your home in the moment and the disaster. You can't just leave a space station, right? You're stuck on the space station, and when you're dealing with an extraterrestrial terror, this gets even worse. And today I'm going to be talking about a couple games, 5 games specifically, where space horror is explored. So these are not in chronological release order or anything like that. They're kind of in a thematic order that I think will make sense as we move through the video. You're watching Rayl Deal Games, and I make new gaming videos every Wednesday and Friday on a variety of gaming subjects. I'm a variety gamer through and through, so I never stick to one genre or one series. I'm always bouncing around because I like everything pretty much. I'm a fan of many different genres and many different series. If you like the video today, consider smashing that like button, subscribing, and ringing the notification bell. You may like my other and future work. With all of that established, let's dive right in with a conversation about Alien Isolation. A vast majority of you subscribed because of that Alien Isolation analysis I put out back in 2024. And yeah, it's one of my favorite games ever made. I love it so much. Makes sense. The original 1979 film that Alien Isolation is a direct sequel to is my favorite movie ever made. I love it so much, and part of the reason I love it so much is the way that it builds up atmosphere for the first long stretch of the film before you ever get exposed to the extraterrestrial terrors that the movie is centered around. Alien Isolation has a slow burn beginning as well. It's a little bit more action focused, it's faster for sure, but you actually don't come across the alien right away. And the reason why you don't come across that xenomorph is because it's trying to replicate the terror buildup of the first movie, and I think it's quite good at that, especially if you don't go into the game knowing that there is no xenomorph for the first little while of the game. It doesn't show up until the first tram, or the tram that you come across after Axel is killed. If you sit there too long, the xenomorph can come and kill you. It happened to me on my very first playthrough because I was kind of like, I was kind of like just sitting around and exploring, and I was taking my time walking around because I didn't know what to expect, and I was terrified. And yeah, that's actually where my first death was on my first playthrough, because it can show up there, unless I'm misremembering, because I've never died there since then. I could be definitely misremembering. But being trapped on a space station, even a large one with something like a xenomorph, would be absolutely terrifying. A lot of the reason that we like horror media is because it is terror that we can turn off when we want to. You go to a horror film to get scared, and if you're too scared, you can close your ears, close your eyes, or just turn it off, right? But if you are in a situation where your living arrangement has made it so that you cannot escape from something, that is, like, in and of itself just incredibly terrifying. Like, I used the house example for like Halloween before, but yeah, if your house is invaded, that's going to actually create some lasting trauma for you in terms of being scared of somebody invading your space. But what happens if it's a space station? You can't move. You can't just move to a different home You can't do that in this economy anyway, let's be real. But you just can't do that. And I think that's kind of where space horror lives and thrives. It's a fear of the unknown, a kind of xenophobia. But then it's also kind of like a perversion of what's known. The idea of home and of family and of work, which are all mashed together in space. And none of these places are safe in the context of something like Alien Isolation. Space horror also gets to play around with the concept of sound, because once you're outside of the space station in a lot of these media properties, there is no sound, just like there isn't in real outer space. There's no materials just sitting around in the void of space for sound to bounce off of. So sound is something that space horror can really mess with, to quite great effect, honestly. I think the only thing outside of space horror that really does this super well is like A Quiet Place, which plays around with the concept of sound and horror extremely well. But space was there first, and space has a natural explanation for why that is. And, space horror also is very closely related to body horror, which makes a lot of sense because we don't know, one, if extraterrestrials even exist, and two, what their intention for us would be if they did. The xenomorph life cycle, being parasitic in its nature and invasive, is terrifying on its own. But it's not the only time that we've seen this kind of thing. John Carpenter's The Thing really gives us a kind of this flesh melding terror that a lot of space horror games have taken up. And the first one that I can think of is System Shock 2 with The Many. You see, The Many mind controls their hosts, takes their flesh, turns it into new things, and then creates this Cronenberg mess of flesh and bone and just icky stuff. And their whole goal is to erase other consciousnesses in the universe and leave just them. And the horror in System Shock 2, just like I said in my video about it earlier this year, is very multifaceted because you have that element of horror, but then you also have AI horror, which is very closely linked with space horror as well. And AI horror is very chaotic these days. And it's like System Shock 2 is trying to put you, the player, in the middle of those three terrors, and then a third terror that also is very closely related to space horror as well. The terror of being stuck in a capitalist system you can't escape. This exists with the Weyland-Yutani Company in Alien, and it exists on the Von Braun in System Shock 2 as well. These aren't the only games that kind of focus on this too, because it exists with the CEC in Dead Space, which I'll be talking about more on Friday. Now, Dead Space 1 and 2 are some of my favorite horror games ever made. They're not the scariest experiences, but they do have a lot of body horror to them that I really appreciate. The necromorphs are a genius idea in the way that the markers invade the mind, so you have like a cerebral terror, and then they take over the flesh and make the monstrosities that they do. And it's very clear that Dead Space was inspired by RE4, the original RE4, which does this particular type of body horror extremely well too, and also Alien in a lot of ways. Now, what Dead Space does better than the other things I just talked about is the way that they kind of really prey on that claustrophobic feel of a space station. You know, System Shock 2 can have tight corridors sometimes, but you can also find yourself in big open areas in System Shock 2 much more often than you might think. Alien Isolation is designed for you to be able to maneuver around the xenomorph, and so a lot of areas in Alien Isolation are also less cramped too, but in Dead Space, you find yourself quite consistently in very tight hallways, being attacked from both angles, front and behind, by a horde of xenomorphs that don't die to conventional means. If you haven't played the games before, you have to slice limbs off to deal extra damage in Dead Space, and regular shots just don't do much. So that's even more different than something like Aliens, where blasting the Xeno in the cranium is the right thing to do, and System Shock 2, where you quite often have way more armaments than you need by the end of the game. And I think that there's something to be said about the loss of autonomy with these games. You know, in System Shock 2, you've got the story of Nurse Bloom, who is forcibly turned into a cyborg midwife against her will, which basically just means that She's had most of her body replaced with cybernetic enhancements, including her entire bottom half, and she's forced against her will to take care of the young of the many. And what's even worse about that particular thing, she's unable to be unhappy about the arrangement because of a thing at the base of her spine that basically pumps happy chemicals into her brain for being used by the many. It's like insane, the kind of reprogramming from a biological and cerebral level that happens in System Shock 2, and this is a Dead Space thing as well. The marker imprints upon the people who see it, and then they want to do what the marker says a lot of the time. And there's a kind of gaslighting manipulation that the markers and the necromorphs in Dead Space do to their victims that really adds to the existential horror of that particular game. And this is something that kind of happens in Doom 3 as well. Doom 3 is the horror game of that franchise, and you know, it's really only the beginning that's like that, because when you get into the later stages of Doom 3, it turns into a shooter again. Not as high frantic as the other games in the series, but definitely horror doesn't really factor into it when you've got a billion bullets everywhere. But what I really like about Doom 3 in terms of space horror is they really do set up the Mars colony, and you get to see how the Mars colony functions before the fall and during the fall. And the fall is very, very quick. And then after that, you are running through very tight corridors once again against a bunch of demons that can spawn in anywhere. It's really nicely done in the space horror subgenre and truly does make that game stand out in my opinion. And there's one more game I want to talk about today. We've talked about 5 so far: Dead Space 1 and 2, System Shock 2, Alien Isolation, Doom 3. But the last one here isn't technically space, but it's close enough, I think, and that's going to be SOMA. So SOMA technically takes place at the bottom of the ocean in a secret research facility, but the whole point of it is to launch an ark into space where the copied minds of multiple people will live forever in paradise. What's very interesting about the horror of this particular game is the way that it's existential in nature. In fact, a lot of these games have existential horror is something they do really, really well. Like, what are we? What is the confines of humanity? Stuff like that. And what I really like about the way SOMA does it is because you get to actually play multiple versions of the same character. So when somebody's mind is copied, they don't go. Their copy goes. This actually happens in Invincible with the character of Robot as well, where when he clones himself, the original him doesn't get to go into the new body. It's a copy of him. And this happens with the main character of SOMA as well. He copies himself into another body, and then his old body is forced to sit there for all of eternity. His original self, well, not even his original self, because the first version of him you play is a copy of the original self that died a long time ago. But then the second copy, the third iteration of the character, is forced to sit at the bottom of the ocean forever after launching the Ark. And he is in the dark alone until his entire robot body finally gives up. And that is insane. Being truly alone at the end of the world in complete darkness would be insanity inducing. And what's even worse about that is that the copies, it's like seamless. They have all of the memories. It's like they were just there and then they're somewhere else. And, you know, not space horror specifically, but it definitely is close enough, I think, with SOMA. And guys, this is like why I think there's nothing like space horror. And I want to throw it back to you guys and ask, what is your favorite version of space horror, and what are the aspects of this subgenre of horror that you really, really appreciate? Let's talk about it in the comments below, and while you're down there, I would love it if you smash the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. I make new gaming videos every Wednesday and Friday, and you may like my other and future work. And hey, if you have a moment right now, maybe consider checking out one of the videos on the screen. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you guys for giving me your time today. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.